Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the organizers and co-sponsors, I would like to thank you for participating today in the side event National Implementation of the International Guidelines on Human Rights and Drug Policy, Insights from Diverse Contexts. My name is Dimiter, Chalev. I'm the Chief of Rule of Law, Equality and Non-Discrimination branch of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And I have to say first how happy I am for this participation in this forum here. And thankful to all our panelists, in particular also for the opening remarks by Ambassador Gil. I know how busy you are with the negotiations. Thank you for being here with us. This event is organized by Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and also the University of Essex International Center for Human Rights and Drug Policy with co-sponsorship from 32 member states. Also UN entities, regional organizations, civil society partners. The total list of all the co-sponsors is available on the events flyer. In 2019, to provide guidance on how to develop rights-based drug policies, the UNDP and the International Center on Human Rights and Drug Policy, in partnership with UNAIDS, WHO, and OHCHR, launched the International Guidelines on Human Rights and Drug Policy. UNODC also contributed to these guidelines. They consolidate existing human rights norms and standards on drug policy, provide practical recommendations across three broad sectors: health, development, and criminal justice. Since their launch in 2019, they have offered a comprehensive framework for aligning national drug policies with human rights obligations. Today, the purpose of this meeting is really to explore how different countries from various regions have made these guidelines operational into their national context, and showcasing diverse approaches, but also challenges across varied socio-political and economic contexts. So we have distinguished panelists from Brazil, Colombia, Ghana, Pakistan, and Scotland, who will share how these guidelines are being used to advance human rights-based drug policies in local realities. But first, I'm very honored to invite Her Excellency, Ambassador Laura Gil, permanent representative of Colombia to the United Nations in Vienna, to deliver the opening remarks. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And good morning. It is a pleasure to be here between a very good friend and colleague and between an office that has supported us so much through the years. At the beginning, I'd like to say something. Our new national drug policy, which was drafted after extensive consultation with civil society and the populations in local territories, includes the international guidelines of human rights and drug policy. Not only as a framework in which the drug policy is designed, but it is explicitly cited, quoted as one of the orientating documents of the national drug policy. And we are very, very proud of being one of the first national drug policies that can actually claim to be based on the international guidelines. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the side event on implementing the international guidelines on human rights and drug policy. It is a privilege to gather here today with representatives from Colombia, Brazil, Ghana, Pakistan, Scotland, each bringing unique perspectives and experiences to our discussion. As we explore the diverse approaches and challenges faced in that different socio-political and economic contexts, we are reminded of the critical importance of human rights in shaping effective and compassionate drug policies. This side event aims to highlight how these principles are being operationalized at both national and local levels to address local realities. The guidelines provide a framework to ensure that drug policies respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. This includes the right to health, life, and non-discrimination, among many others. By adopting and implementing these guidelines, countries can create just, effective, and humane drug policies that uphold human rights and promote public health, which is in the end actually the goals and objectives of the global drug regime. National implementation of the guidelines involves engaging and empowering affected communities. This participatory approach ensures that policies are responsive to the needs and realities of those most impacted by drug-related issues. In Colombia, we have made notable progress in implementing the international guidelines on human rights and drug policy, and here are some key aspects. One, judicial integration. The Constitutional Court of Colombia has actually quoted the guidelines in many of its rulings, significant rulings, by the way. In 2019 already, the court referenced the guidelines in a decision regarding substance use, and human rights. In 2020, the court used the guidelines in a landmark case to halt the use of glyphosate for crop eradication. 2. Community-based interventions. Colombia has focused on reducing demand through community-based interventions. These initiatives aim to provide sustainable economic alternatives for communities historically affected by drug-related activities. By investing in sustainable livelihoods, Colombia is addressing the root causes of drug-related issues while upholding human rights. Strengthening state presence. Efforts have been made to strengthen state presence in marginalized territories. This includes ensuring that human rights are upheld and that communities receive necessary support. By enhancing state presence, Colombia aims to create a more stable and supportive environment for affected communities. And 4, technical assistance and capacity building. Colombia has developed a range of implementation activities to support government actors in strengthening the human rights approach in drug-related policy matters. This includes training and capacity building initiatives to empower individuals and communities to advocate for human rights-based drug policies. Everything I described, I hope, shows my country's commitment to integrating human rights into a drug policy framework, addressing local realities, promoting sustainable and humane solutions, and leaving no one behind. So the goal today for this side event, co-organized by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and the International Center for Human Rights and Drug Policy at the University of Essex is to foster a rich exchange of ideas and best practices that can inspire and inform our collective efforts. By learning from each other, we can advance policies that not only address the complexities of drug-related issues, but also uphold the dignity and rights of all individuals. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a very productive and enlightening discussion, and I hope each one of you will be able to forgive me for having to go and negotiate our resolution. So I apologize, but I wish I could stay here, but I have a resolution to care for. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And good luck with the negotiations. So after having heard about the pioneering role of Colombia in implementing the international guidelines, I would like now to invite Professor Julie Hanna, co-director of the International Center for Human Rights and Drug Policy, to provide a brief introduction to the national implementation of the guidelines and share insights of how they have been operationalized in various contexts globally. Professor Hanna.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here today to discuss the diverse experiences of implementing the international guidelines on human rights and drug policy. At the heart of this conversation is a fundamental truth. Human rights are universal, but they must also always be applied in ways that are locally relevant. We know, but it's important to emphasize, that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to drug policy. No singular blueprint that works for every country, every city, or every community. Drug policy at its core is a technical, ordinary matter of policymaking. It's about regulations, enforcement, sometimes health services, and social programs. But human rights are something different. They are not just another technical consideration. They are the fundamental principles that should guide every policy decision that we make. The reality is that change and the evidence that informs it happens at the national and local levels. It happens from rural area to rural area, from city to city. The experiences of people in Brazil, a large and diverse country, will not be the same as those in Scotland, or Ghana, or Colombia, Pakistan, or anywhere else. Drug trends will differ, the needs of communities will be distinct, and the political and social context will always vary. And yet, amidst all of this diversity that we'll hear about today, the thing that connects these different constellations of experience is not drug policy itself, it is human rights. So what we do about drug policy and human rights must be internalized within governments, embedded in local practices, and shaped by the realities of each place. We must resist the temptation to impose rigid top-down models and instead embrace approaches that are rooted in local contexts while upholding international human rights law. Certain lines should never be crossed. These must be human rights standards and not arbitrary drug control standards. Implementing the guidelines has been how I have engaged with and learned from these different contexts, making this journey incredibly rewarding. Watching how universal human rights take shape in specific places, how they are debated, applied, and challenged has been a profound experience. And now we know that the guidelines are globally relevant. They're applied to global north and global south contexts. We know the guidelines are a catalyst for dialogue and multi-stakeholder engagement, key ingredients for rights-based change. And we know the guidelines have led to concrete human rights improvements on the ground, empowering communities of people who use drugs, liberating people unjustly incarcerated, and catalyzing governments to put human rights at the center of new visions for drug policy reform. It's shown me that while the language of human rights remains constant, its implementation must be adaptable. The complexities of governance and historical context mean that no two places will apply the guidelines in exactly the same way. But what matters is the commitment to the process, to listening, adapting, and ensuring that people and their rights are at the center of every policy choice. Implementing the guidelines, operationalizing rights in drug policy is not a linear or one-dimensional project. It's not easy, but doing hard things is meaningful. And the effort to align drug policies with human rights principle is a challenge that's worth embracing. The struggles, the innovations, the challenges, these are diverse, they are complex, but they all contribute to a brilliant collection of experiences that inform how we all can move forward. When we take universal human rights standards and apply them in real-world contexts, we create something far more powerful than a drug policy alone. We foster community, we can build justice, and we can drive sustainable change for the future. So thank you all for coming today, and to my fellow panelists who are engaged in this meaningful process of change, and I look forward to our exchange and discussion.
Thank you, Julia, for your role also in developing the guidelines, also reminding us that they're universal. Yes, they're adaptable according to national contexts. So now I would like to turn to our first panelist, Marta Machado, who is the National Secretary for Drug Policy and Asset Management in Brazil. Secretary Machado, Brazil has recently launched innovative drug reforms, including adopting a national strategy for access to rights for the Black and peripheral population in drug policy, which aims to address this issue from a social, justice, and public health perspective, moving away from repressive policies. Additionally, the Brazil Supreme Court issued a judgment in June 2024 declaring the unconstitutionality of criminalizing personal possession of cannabis. This ruling recognized the need for a shift towards a public health approach, acknowledging the harmful impacts of criminalization of users and dependents. So could you share with us how the international guidelines have been informing efforts to harmonize drug policy in Brazil with international human rights law amidst complex social economic challenges? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's a special pleasure to be here, decided by Colombia and like-minded countries to share Brazil's experience. I express my deep appreciation to the Office of the High Commissioners on Human Rights and the University of Access and all the co-sponsors for bringing us here today, but also to their steadfast commitment to promoting human rights-based approach to their policy. I personally thank Juliana, Saved, and Boyan for their invaluable collaboration to advancing the implementation of the guidelines in Brazil. The full recognition and implementation of the guidelines is more urgent than ever. Brazil, but not only Brazil, serves as a stark example of how ineffective security and drug policies exacerbate structural inequalities. The war on drugs has disproportionately criminalized Black and marginalized communities, pushing young people into cycles of violence, incarceration, and social exclusion. The numbers speak for themselves. While the Brazilian Black population represents 56% of the total population, 70% of the incarcerated population in Brazil are Black, with 1/3 in prison for drug-related offenses. The number is alarming higher for women. Over 50% of incarcerated women in the country are there for drug-related offenses. In prisons close to the frontiers, this number can amount to 80%. Criminal organizations exploit economic vulnerability and actively recruit children and adolescents, filling the gaps left by limited access to education, employment, and social services. According to the National Council of Justice, drug trafficking is the most common offense committed by juvenile offenders in Brazil. Although the Convention 182 of the International Labour Organization indicates that it's the worst form of child labor and they should be protected, our justice system just only looks at them as criminals. For you to have an idea of how contentious it is in Brazil, the Brazilian Congress is now and has been trying forever to discuss the idea of decreasing the age at which some can be tried as an adult in the criminal system. In neighborhoods heavily affected by drug trafficking, students are 3 times more likely to drop out of school by the age of 16. In Rio's Favela da Maré, home to over 140,000 people, schools were forced to close due to police operations, causing children to lose 43 days of education in just 1 year. Black individuals are also the biggest victims of violence. In 2022 alone, they have totaled more than 35,000 victims, which correspond to a rate of 29.7 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants in this population group. In 2023, they made up 82.7% of those killed in police operations, with a mortality rate of 289% higher than that of white individuals. In this scenario, the Brazilian current administration has shifted its drug policy from punishment to a public health, social inclusion, and human rights focused approach. A key milestone in this transformation was the publication of the International Guidelines on Human Rights and Drug Policy in Portuguese, only in 2023, when we entered the government, when Lula entered the government. These guidelines have served as a crucial reference in shaping our action plans, but it was also the base, the starting point of the process we are now conducting, the participatory building of our national drug policy plan. So maybe we are the number 2 country to have the guidelines fully integrated to our national policy plan. Also in line with the guidelines recommendation, Brazil has launched 3 key national strategies to address the specific needs of groups in vulnerable situations. The National Strategy for Indigenous People in Drug Policy, the National Strategy for Women's access to rights in drug policy, and the specifically building for the idea I have just presented, we also created the National Strategy for Black and Peripheral Communities in Drug Policy. An integral part of this last strategy I mentioned is the National Program of Public Security with Citizenship for the Youth, named PRONACE. It's a transformative program targeting high-risk youth aged 15 to 24, particularly Black and peripheral youth, to prevent their involvement in organized crime. It integrates harm reduction, access to rights, and economic opportunities in communities impacted by the war on drugs. Through financial support, the program keeps young people in education and vocational training, partnering with the Ministries of Education and Labor to provide schooling, job training, and placement in technology, entrepreneurship, and creative economy. The project is part of the National Plan of Black Youth, Juventude Negra Viva, conducted by the Ministry of Racial Equality, and it plays a key role in dismantling systemic barriers affecting Black youth in Brazil's peripheries. We discussed this program at length during our side event last Tuesday, and there the office representative, the EMLR representative, Victor Manuel Rodrigues, the member of the EMLR, the mechanism, provided valuable inputs and underscored the scenario also in the region. The institutional racism on the enforcement of the criminal law is not only recognized in our actions in the ambit of the executive branch of the government, but it was also fully recognized in the landmark Supreme Court ruling, which determined that the possession of cannabis for personal use no longer constitutes a criminal offense. The case began in 2011, and it was only last year that the court declared the partial unconstitutionality of Article 28 of our drug law, specifically regarding cannabis possession, stating that personal possession should be subject only to civil or administrative measures rather than criminal sanctions. One of the ruling's most crucial aspects in its response to the long-standing issue of the absence of an objective threshold distinguish users and sellers, a loophole that has enabled law enforcement and judicial bias, disproportionately targeting Black and low-income individuals. To address this, the court established a guideline until Congress enacted specific legislation, which is individuals found in possession of up to 40 grams of cannabis or 6 plants will be presumed to be consumers. The federal court's ruling also discussed the broader social and legal implications of criminalizing cannabis. It pointed out that vague standards for reasonable suspicion enabled racial profiling and contributed to the overrepresentation of minorities in the criminal justice system. In this sense, one of the justices on this case, Minister Alexandre de Moraes, recalled the fact that a white person needs to be in possession of 80% more cannabis than a Black person to be considered a drug dealer. Therefore, the court called for comprehensive legal reform to align drug policy practices with constitutional principles of equality and non-discrimination. The decision also stands beyond reclassifying possession from a criminal to an administrative offense. The court called on the executive branch to advance prevention programs, to implement the administrative measures aimed at strengthening public policies for individuals with substance use-related needs, and the implementation of measures that combat stigma and institutional racism in the application of the national legislation on drugs. This directive highlights the necessity of transitioning away from punitive frameworks towards a comprehensive, health-centered model that ensures broader access to essential services and social protection. We are now in charge to develop these plans. Another major impact of this ruling was the unlocking the previously frozen funds from the National Fund for Drug Policy, allowing us for more ambitious planning and expansion of harm reduction initiatives. This led us to build now, that's the process we are now developing, the creation of a nationwide harm reduction network, the Centers for Access to Rights and Social Inclusion in Drug Policy. We discussed that yesterday, which is an initiative that goes beyond addressing health-related harms to tackle the social dimensions of substance use, an essential approach in highly unequal countries like Brazil. So we prioritize the provision of comprehensive care, access to basic needs and fundamental rights, such as documentation, inclusion in social programs, and legal protection, housing, and income. And we are now establishing a partnership with the University of São Paulo and the University of Access to develop the indicators and conducting the monitoring of this policy based on the guidelines. Ladies and gentlemen, for too long, drug policy, human rights, and social development policies have been treated separately. This fragmented approach has failed not only to address the root causes of Brazil's public security crisis, but also the drug system as a whole. The international guidelines on human rights and drug policy offer a critical framework to shift the focus from punitive measures to long-term solutions. Drug policies must stop criminalizing poverty in racialized communities and instead promote sustainable development, social inclusion, and racial justice. I hope more countries will integrate these guidelines into national policies soon. It's also time for the UN system to strengthen its coordination among agencies, and particularly this Commission, to ensure that drug policies are aligned with broader human rights, public health, and sustainable development efforts. We are now facing very contentious times, and it demands steady commitments to the values we cannot negotiate: human rights, racial justice, and sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Machado, and thank you for sharing with us the comprehensive approach that Brazil is taking in this regard, and also we hear your call to strengthen coordination among UN agencies as well. So now we'll turn to Pakistan. I would like to invite our next panelist, State Minister Q. Malik, the Ministry of Justice and Law, and member of the Pakistan's National Assembly. Minister, the Pakistan government has been working on advancing humane responses to drug control. We welcome Pakistan's abolition of the death penalty for drug-related offenses as a step forward, aligning national policies with international human rights standards. We also welcome recent Federal Judicial Academy efforts to develop a training course for judges on human rights and drug policy based on the international guidelines. Can you please elaborate further on what efforts Pakistan is making in strengthening human rights protection in the implementation of national drug law through law and policy reform? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. I'll begin with expressing and extending my gratitude to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, the International Center for Human Rights and Drug Policy, all the co-sponsoring member states, as well as the UN entities, civil society partners, convening this essential discussion. Of course, the events like these are much needed spaces for a meaningful discourse that actually permits and allows us to learn from diverse national experiences such as Colombia and Brazil that we just heard, and refine our policies in aligning with the human rights standards. Pakistan obviously stands at a very critical juncture in its drug policy reform. Our approach has significantly shifted from one that was centered on punitive enforcement to the one that prioritizes health, human dignity, and proportionality in our legal responses. We recognize the international guidelines for human rights and drug policy as a crucial framework for embedding these principles into our national strategies. The challenges for us, as for many other countries, is ensuring that drug policy both upholds human rights obligations while effectively addressing drug-related crimes. Striking this balance is essential for achieving justice and ensuring policies that are both effective and humane. A defining moment was in 2023, where we shifted, from death penalty or capital punishment to Pakistan abolishing the death penalty for drug-related offences. And this was a move that aligned with the international human rights standards and reinforced our commitment to proportionality in sentencing. While legal reforms remain as one piece of the puzzle, the amendment was a major step away from an enforcement-heavy model towards that recognizes the need for rehabilitation and fair sentencing. Currently, it is unfortunate, despite the abolition of death penalty, we still have 20 individuals that remain on death row for drug offences. And we as the government are actively working towards ensuring their sentences are reviewed under the new framework. Recognizing Pakistan's judiciary rather plays a crucial role in shaping up the implementation. And most recently, with Julie's visit that we just heard, the Pakistan's Federal Judicial Academy introduced a specialized e-course on the international guidelines of human rights and drug policy, which was an initiative that judges handling drug-related offenses or cases are equipped with a tool to incorporate human rights principles and their rulings, and result of which we've just recently seen as well in one of the cases where the international guidelines on human rights and drug policy were effectively implemented after imparting with the training that we recently held back in January. And these tools incorporate human rights principles in their ruling, like I said, particularly regarding proportional sentencing and alternatives to incarceration. By building judicial capacity through ensuring that the legal reforms translate into fair judicial outcomes, the issue of over-incarceration or overcrowding, obviously, in prisons remain one of the most pressing concerns, particularly given that 21% of Pakistan's prison population is incarcerated under the Control of Narcotic Substances Act, CND. We've had an amendment in 2022 to this particular piece of legislation that removed parole and probation for drug offences that resulted in a significant surge in incarceration rates, which exacerbated overcrowding and disproportionately affected the marginalized groups, such as women and the younger lot. So, which obviously has prompted an urgent discussion on reintroducing non-custodial sentences options such as probation, community services and rehabilitation programs for minor drug-related offences. Expanding these alternatives will not only reduce the strain in our prison systems, but will also ensure that drug dependency is treated as a public health issue rather than purely just a criminal justice matter. Despite these advancements, we do still face challenges and policy implementation gaps continue to persist. While the legal framework has evolved and changed over time, ensuring effective application of human rights-based principles on ground remain a work in progress. Prison overcrowding and sentencing disparities continue to be the major concern, with 83.14% of the individuals incarcerated under the CNSA still awaiting trial. There is a pressing need to differentiate between drug users and traffickers, and this is where we need to draw that distinction or differentiation, ensuring that those struggling with substance use are not subjected to excessive penalties. Pakistan is committed to addressing these challenges through legislative amendments, including revisiting sentencing guidelines and incorporating clear thresholds for personal drug possession. Public perception and stigma, of course, remain a major barrier to the implementation of harm reduction policies, and we're working towards launching national awareness campaigns that emphasize the science of addiction, the effectiveness of harm reduction, and the importance of rehabilitation over punishment. Going forward, Pakistan is focused on three key areas: ensuring proportionate sentencing by empowering judicial discretion and reviewing excessive sentences, scaling up harm reduction services by expanding evidence-based treatment options, and strengthening international partnerships to align our policies with the global best practices. Pakistan values the opportunity to engage in this forum, as dialogue and collaboration remain essential in shaping drug policies that are just, humane, and effective. The ultimate measure of a successful drug policy is not the number of arrests made, but the number of lives rehabilitated and reintegrated into the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for sharing some positive developments in Pakistan, but also talking about the challenges that you still have to address. Now I'll turn now to the experience of Scotland. I welcome Professor Alan Miller, independent chair of the National Collaborative of the Drug Mission in Scotland. Professor Miller, Scotland has recently launched the Charter of rights of people affected by substance use. This was just in December last year. And this is described as the first of its kind in the world. Could you tell us how this charter was inspired by the international guidelines on human rights and drug policy? And how does the charter integrate the lived experiences of people affected by substance use into drug policy reform? Also, if you could tell us what lessons can be shared with other countries considering similar initiatives. So, Professor Mir, I understand that you also introduced a pre-recorded message from Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care of the Government of Scotland after your intervention. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for the invitation from the office to join this panel. Yes, a number of questions I've been asked to respond to, but my eye is on the clock, and I don't think I want to attempt to answer all these questions. Otherwise, we'll run out of question and answer time before we get to the end. So maybe if I just say a few words before introducing the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, who's made a video message for us. Very briefly, for those of you who don't know the situation in Scotland, we have the worst record of drug-related deaths in Europe. And because of that, there has over the past period been a shift from criminalization and stigmatization of those affected by substance use to a public health and human rights-based approach. And a national mission on drug deaths was declared several years ago to demonstrate that shift. The Charter of Rights launched at the end of last year, following an extensive public participatory process, is part of this shift that Scotland is making efforts to undertake. So I'll just deal with the first question because it's probably the most relevant. How was the Charter of Rights for people affected by substance use inspired by the international guidelines on human rights and drug policy? And very, very briefly, I think we all know that people affected by substance use are stigmatized, discriminated against, marginalized, and this results in self-stigma. And so many people not actually seeking the support that they are entitled to because they don't feel as deserving as others of the health and social support that they need. So it is very important to empower people affected by substance use to see themselves differently and to see themselves as rights holders and be aware of what rights they have. And there are many rights in international human rights law. The contribution, therefore, of the guidelines is that it identifies the most relevant of internationally recognized human rights, explains their application to the drugs context, and in particular, the right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health is one of the 7 key rights that we have enshrined in the Charter of Rights in Scotland. But also, importantly, about the guidelines, and maybe not so much talked about as it could be, is it's very helpful in outlining the duties of those decision makers who design and who deliver and who monitor related public support services. And it's been very helpful in our work therefore not only to empower people with awareness of what their rights are, but also to ensure that the duty bearers understand the duties that they have under international human rights law. And the innovative thing about the process in Scotland in developing the Charter and a toolkit which accompanies it to provide guidance on how to apply it is the collaboration between rights holders and duty bearers, that they have a shared understanding of the situation that both are in and therefore what progress needs to be made. And so just to conclude, the next phase of the Charter's development is its implementation. And that starts next week in a process of implementation interactions between rights holders and duty bearers, led by the government and the National Collaborative, and it will develop concrete, good practice, which can then be scaled up and mainstreamed across the health and social care system. So, very brief, but hopefully we've caught up some time. And I don't know whether this is going to work or not, but if the video message from the Cabinet Secretary could be shown, that would be good.
Please use your headphone to listen. The sound is a little bit low.
I would like to start by expressing my thanks to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and the International Centre for Human Rights and Drugs Policy for organising this event and for inviting me to say a few words about our work to integrate drug policy and human rights in Scotland. It is an honour to be asked to contribute to your discussions today and to have our work in Scotland to integrate human rights and lived experience throughout our approach to drugs and alcohol acknowledged in an international platform. We are clear that a rights-based approach is key to delivering Scotland's national mission to improve lives, reduce drug deaths, and we are committed to ensuring equalities and human rights are at the heart of everything we do. Central to this has been supporting the National Collaborative to develop the Charter of Rights for people affected by substance use, to clearly articulate how universal human rights can be delivered to people with lived and living experience and their families. The international guidelines on human rights and drug policy were fundamental to the development of the Charter. These clearly align with the Scottish Government's approach to supporting people affected by substances as we moved away from a criminal justice to a public health policy approach. The international guidelines provided a framework from which the National Collaborative could build the Charter and adapt the rights included in the particular national context here in Scotland. I was delighted to attend the launch of the Charter of Rights in December and was energised by the enthusiasm and passion with which it was received. Our challenge in Scotland now is to influence, encourage and support the embedding of the Charter of Rights across public services. The Scottish Government will work closely with the National Collaborative Change Team and duty bearers to push forward embedding the Charter and a human rights-based approach across public services. As a first step, we are co-convening an event later this month with the National Collaborative, bringing together duty bearers and rights holders to support consideration of how we embed the Charter across the drug and alcohol sector in Scotland. The Scottish Government has a role to play as leaders, as influencers for our partners, and this Government is determined to use existing levers to encourage cultural and practical changes to support the embedding and delivery of those rights clearly outlined in the Charter. Equally, the Scottish Government is a duty bearer and we are responsible for embedding a human rights-based approach in our policies and practices. The international guidelines have already influenced this through the development of the Charter of Rights and will continue to do so as we ensure that we integrate the human rights-based approach and specifically the rights outlined within the Charter in our future work. Only through collaboration across sectors and by responding meaningfully to the voice of lived experience of people affected by substance use and their families will we be able to maximise our potential to deliver for the people of Scotland. Although I am unable to attend today in person, I look forward to hearing about your discussions and learning from the experiences of other states who are also taking steps to reform approaches to supporting people affected by substance use from a rights-based perspective.
Thank you, Professor Miller, and also for highlighting the role of duty bearers in implementing the policy which is based on human rights. Now I'll turn to the experience of Ghana and also civil society. Our final panelist is Maria Goretti Loglo, who is the Africa consultant for the International Drug Policy Consortium. So you're representing civil society, and you were the second country, Ghana, to host a national dialogue on the international guidelines on human rights and drug policy back in 2022. Ghana has made a lot of progress in drug policy reform. Could you share how civil society has supported Ghana's authorities' efforts in implementing human rights-based policy and how the guidelines can influence the progress in integrating public health and human rights international policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And please permit me to use this opportunity to thank the Office of the Human Rights Commission and all the co-sponsors for giving civil society the seat to be able to share what has been done so far as a country. I must acknowledge the fact that my country has really done very well, because with the journey of drug policy, they have always created a space for civil society to contribute to the discussions and bring to our experience to bear in terms of this conversation. You will all recall that in 2020, Ghana passed a new law, and in this law, it sought to remove all custodial sentence for persons who use drugs and to make room for them to be able to access health services. For the first time in our drug law, that acknowledges the fact that drug use should be seen as a public health issue and not a criminal justice issue. Throughout all these discussions and all these initiatives that have been done, we still recognize that there was still the need to do more in terms of improving upon the law, and also how the implementation itself has to go. And of course, that came in at the right time when the guidelines were launched in 2019. We by then had not passed the law, but after the law was passed in 2022, in discussions with other partners and civil society, and as well as the various agencies within the state, it was important to organize a discussion, have a roundtable discussion, to see how we can plug in some of these global discussions and initiatives and practices into our law to help us to be able to implement this. And in 2022, with the support of the Human Rights Commission, the Office of the High Commissioner, and the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, with support from UNAIDS, we organized the first ever dialogue. I think we were the first African country to organize this dialogue. I mean, this dialogue was very important, and I think the guidelines came in at the right time, because we were able to use the guidelines to identify gaps that already existed in our law. And one of the gaps that I could probably share here is the fact that with this law, we still realize that there were a lot of provisions and initiatives that, if we do not take time, could even deepen the stigma around people who use drugs. We also realize that with this law, there's need for service delivery. You cannot just take custodial sentences away, and then you're not making room for people who need services to be given services. So with all these gaps that were identified, we in 2013, we convened another dialogue from the initiatives of the recommendations from the guidelines, and we came together as a nation to discuss this. And let me say that these discussions were really very broad, because for the first time we got our Human Rights Commission to be very active and part of these discussions around drugs. Because for the past few years that we have had these discussions, we haven't had the Commission participating actively. And for the first time, through these guidelines, which they were part of, they actively participated, and we came up with a national roadmap on stigma reduction for persons who use drugs. And that was the first time we are developing a national roadmap on stigma to be able to address issues like that. And also from these discussions of the guidelines, it came to light that there was need for us to initiate harm reduction. And thankfully, 2023, through the initiative of civil society once again, and with partnership with state agencies, we managed to have this discussion, and through the support of Global Fund, we kick-started a pilot on harm reduction. And I must say that before the kickstart of the pilot of the harm reduction program, we managed to get the University of Ghana School of Public Health to do a rapid assessment to give us a picture of what was happening nationwide, so that we would be able to address the needs of the citizens, especially people who use drugs. And as of 2023, we were able to cover close to about 14 districts in terms of harm reduction. There were hotspot mapping of various key areas where we needed to do that. And I'm glad to say that in last year, we managed to launch about 6 DCs, that's drop-in centers, where we use community and the community centers to be able to reach out to many of the people who use drugs. As we speak, there is discussions currently at the national level to scale up the harm reduction programs to be able to cover the 16 regional districts in terms of our harm reduction services. We have also launched, just before CND last week, we have launched a BTS through the School of Public Health, because as a country, we really do not have a database in terms of the picture nationwide in terms of the drug situation. Apart from the rapid assessment that was done, we thought it was necessary for us to have a broader national picture of how the drug situation looks like. So we have just kick-started that study, and hopefully by August, we should be able to see the results and be able to tell how this picture looks like, and so that we can propose policies and programs that can address the needs of these people. And I must also say that we as a country feel that harm reduction should not just be a political will of governments. We should have a legal backing to harm reduction. And as I speak now, we have a legislative instrument which is before the Attorney General, and hopefully should be going to Parliament to be passed to give national legislative backing to harm reduction services within the country. But I want to end here. I wouldn't want to talk too much because of the time, and once questions come, I'll be able to address them. Thank you very much.